Good morning. Good to see all you dear friends here today. It is my privilege and my joy to be a part of RahRahs. I have been a part of RahRahs, retired and happy. I have a name tag that goes all the way back nearly 20 years. So, but today we are also appreciative and so blessed beyond words and beyond being able to say it. Susan and Bill leading RahRahs now. I know you all appreciate it just as I do. We had such a fun time last month, and we're looking forward and excited to have them spending their time and their talents with us, retired and happy folks. Appreciate the beautiful tables and so many wonderful things that they do. Today I thought I would talk about a subject of aging, a subject that we're all engaged in. I see everybody smiling about that. Because whether we're 5 or 95, we're all aging, and we're each getting older every day that we live. We're older now than we were when we walked in here a few minutes ago. Lately I've been going through my old files, trying to clear them out before my children have to come in and do it. And I'm glad they're here today to hear this. Have found many papers as well as poems that I've enjoyed writing. Since childhood, I've enjoyed writing little rhymes and poems that I call P-O-M-E-S rather than poetry. There's an old Chinese proverb about a city that failed because there was no poet. It had a port, P-O-R-T, but it had no P-O-E-T, no poet in the city. And it had an army, as I said, and a 45 wall, but no poet. We need poets. We do need poets. And when back years and years ago, I was speaking at Berry, and a man came up to compliment me and after the program, and he said he almost didn't come because poetry was so boring to him. But he did enjoy being there and hearing the few little poems and things that I used. We need poets to remind us that God created a world. In fact, he over-created. He could have created in monochrome with no colorful flowers or sunsets. All food could have been tasteless manna. All birds could have been silent. Instead, God lavished color and sound and music and poetry upon our world and upon us. It was God, the Christian God, worldview that built our nation and that opens its doors to all people, with freedom and justice for all, as we like to say. And so just aging has been a subject of interest to many. I keep skipping over so we won't be talking too long, but I want to get in a few things. It's a subject that I'm pleased to have been invited to speak about at many civic groups as well as churches. And as I said earlier, at Berry College, the Elder Hostel group. I was reading a poem to him and he came up and said he was glad to be there because he had always thought poetry was so boring. When our first grandchild was born, Joan asked me, "What do you want her to call you?" And my mother-in-law was already Mama Shaw, so I'd run out of anything, and I said, "Just call me grandmother." But the first time she said grandmother, I looked around to see what little old lady she was talking to. And I wrote, "One day I was a child. I ran holding close my mother's hand. Another day so soon away, a little child I heard her say, 'Grandmother, see.' I turned around both left and right. A little old lady was not in sight. How can it be? Grandmother is me." Where did they go, the youthful years, with all their joys and all their fears? They flew away on wings of love and tears. Where did they go, the youthful years? They went too fast, I said with tears. They flew away in beautiful array, or so they say, like pages turning in a treasured book. And I didn't have time to look. Where did she go, that little girl, the child that once was me? She slipped away to yesterday while I was looking the other way. How could it be? Grandmother, it's me. Charles Shaw and I married as teenagers, but I always loved school. So in my long experience of working on a degree at Georgia State after our 7 children were grown, I suppose I kind of aged into the study of aging, and I finally got a degree in gerontology by my son-in-law Gilbert Krause asked me what I had learned about aging. So I'm going to talk about a few things that I tried to learn about aging. First, I learned that aging is not a disease, but we have to admit, and some of you that have spoken to me since I've been here, we do have more aches and pains as we age, but age itself is not a disease. Don't you hate to go to the doctors and have him say, I think it's just old age? I heard a good illustration of this. An 86-year-old woman went to the doctor with an excruciating pain in her left arm. The doctor couldn't find the problem, so he finally said, I guess it's just old age. And the woman replied, don't hand me that, doctor. My right arm is just as old as my left arm, and it's not hurting. Another thing that we learn about aging from our study, as well as from our own aging, and especially from visiting in nurse care places. And when I was first moved back to Rome nearly 20 years ago, they put me on the staff here, and what I did basically was to visit. So I visited nearly every nursing home in Fort County, and learned a lot about older people, a little bit about old people anyway. And people who are old say old age is not funny, but we do have probably more jokes about old folks than any other group. So I do think a sense of humor, we do need a sense of humor, especially the ability to laugh at ourselves. And I've already seen that in some of you tonight in conversation. Some people don't have the privilege of living in the old age. For those of us who are here and do, we should enjoy it. One amusing story is about a woman who delivered Meals on Wheels, and she took a little 4-year-old granddaughter with her, and the little girl kept looking at a glass with teeth in the old. They were visiting an old man, and he had a glass with his teeth in it on his bedside table. And finally, the little girl turned to her grandmother and whispered, said, the tooth fairy is never going to believe this. Charles Swindoll tells in his book, Laugh Again, about a grandmother spending the evening with her 7-year-old grandchild who kept asking her age, and the grandmother wouldn't tell her age. Finally, she said, Grandmother, I know how old you are. You're 71. And I know something else about you, Grandmother. You failed sex. It says right here, sex F. Regardless of our present age, if we live long enough, there's an old man or an old woman in your future. So I wrote a poem about that. Someday, somehow, somewhere in time, she's waiting. I will see that old woman time is making out of me. Will she be a sad complainer, a fretful tenant of the earth, or a kind, productive person filled with happiness and mirth? Please be patient. God is making, molding slowly out of me, a shining portrait He has promised. Just you wait and see. He is smoothing out the roughness, polishing the dreary places, filling life with joy and gladness, pouring out His gifts and graces. God, remake me in your image. I want to like her when I see that old woman. Time is making out of me. I like the optimism of the little 80-year-old who went for a checkup and taking her history. The woman asked this 80-year-old woman, said, "Any children?" She said, "Not yet." Madeline Lingo, I love to read her stuff. When she was 66, somebody asked her her age. And she said, "The great thing about getting older is you do not lose all the other ages you have been." Isn't that wonderful? I see some of you shaking your head. We realize that, don't we? I love that. I sometimes thought of that when I sat in classes with students in their 20s and 30s. I knew, and you all here know, we all know a little about what it's like to be 20 or 30. But one of the happiest surprises to me about reaching 90, probably there are many surprising things. It's not a family thing. I didn't expect to live into my 90s. There's a continuity. Each day has a past, but it also has a beginning. So when Jack Benny celebrated his 39th birthday 31 times, he got a lot of laughs out of it, but it's not altogether a joke, because I think we can all identify with celebrating birthdays and remembering our early birthdays. I heard Art Linkletter interviewed on TV a few years before he died. He looked great for age 93. In fact, he looked great for any age. But when the interview asked Art Linkletter, he told him, "Well, I just have celebrated my 50th birthday 43 times." In our Bible, Isaiah in his 55th chapter talks about mountains and hills breaking forth in singing and trees clapping their hands. And it seems to me that the mountains are singing clearer and louder in the fall, in the autumn of the year. It's in the fall that people go to the mountains to experience the beauty of the mountains, the colors in the mountains. People crowd bumper to bumper. We read in the newspaper about on the roads going to the mountains in the fall. At a retiree's occasion at Simpsonwood a few years ago, Ken Cook, who is a meteorologist, probably many of you remember him on television, he spoke to us about the flower business that he's engaged in North Georgia. And he said the colors of the dahlias blooming are more vibrant and sparkling when they bloom in the fall than when they first bloom in the spring. And I thought that was such a wonderful thing to think about. They bloom in the spring, but when they bloom again in the fall, they're much more beautiful. And I wrote a poem about that too, that I think is going to be about the last thing I have here. I walked into October and lifted up my ears to hear the very mountain singing, choir robe for praise in autumn clear. Sunset yellows, burning bush reds, my heart in awe took off its shoes and stood on holy ground to view creation's God in autumn here. For every tree was clapping, the doxology lifted high. I think some unseen maestro was pointing to the sky. I heard the mountains singing with concert voices raised, and every hill pulled out to stops, adorned in autumn, breathless autumn praise. I shall long, this last verse is for all of us who are old and all of us who are planning on getting a whole lot older. You remember that phrase? Well, I'm planning on getting a lot older than I am now. I shall long remember this. The mountain's grandest notes are sung, not in springtime newness, but in autumn's aging tone. The Bible never fails to guide us into the right perspective of life, regardless of our age. Psalm 90 was written by an older gentleman. Moses was in his late 80s when he wrote Psalm 90. Psalm 90 begins by reminding us that we are ageless. Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever God formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God. Then he writes in verse 12, so teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. And then he writes, 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it's past, and as a watch in the night. I thought of that, especially when, on the sad occasion in my life when I've been asked to do a funeral service for a baby. And I've done that twice, and I think the most difficult thing that maybe a pastor has to do is to stand before parents who have lost a baby, and we call it an untimely death. But when we read some of these scriptures, we realize that time in the eyes of God is not quite what we see as time. 1,000 years is as a day when it's past. And many of the Psalms do illustrate this is the day that the Lord has made. Today, whatever comes, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Well, this coming Sunday is Easter. And on that first Easter, the disciples had grieved for 3 days. God had stood aside and let them kill the physical body of the only sinless person who ever lived. But just as Jesus said, on the third day, he was raised from the dead. He was alive. They saw him. They ate with him. They knew him. But Jesus was then in a body without limitations, a body that could walk through doors, and a body that could be ascended into heaven. And this is the amazing grace and the amazing good news that we celebrate today and every day, that God came down and wept with us on Good Friday, so that some glad morning, some glad Easter morning, we can laugh with him. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen.
Amen.